The views and opinions expressed in The Fact Is with Hollis Grant are those of Hollis Grant and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Droids Canada Network. Droids Canada Network does not take responsibility for any content or position produced by Hollis Grant and his show. Listener discretion is advised.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. And this week, week number 38 of the year, we've had quite an interesting week. We've had the Canadian elections in which this show did predict a Liberal majority win. Sad to say that did not happen in terms of the prediction, that is. Not the outcome, the prediction. It was a Liberal minority, but the Liberals did pick up a few extra seats. So we're back to square one. So it means much of the same. So in terms of ethics violations, we'll have a lot more to cover. We'll have a lot more to cover about MPs in cabinet, questionable behavior by some of the elected officials, sexual allegation charges, and we're not talking about Ric Flair. We're talking about Liberal candidates. But today, we're not going to talk about that. What we are going to talk about is Ontario, the province of Ontario in Canada. We're talking about the vaccine passport rollout. Absolutely fascinating that this is happening in today's age. The whole idea is to limit the spread of the virus, to not overwhelm hospitals, to not overwhelm hospital beds so that the hospitals can continue to function as normal so they're not dealing with these high flu cases. Ontario, the largest employer, is, and we've covered this on a past episode that you can go back to and listen to on Droids Canada, largest employer is the healthcare system, and much of every other province as well. It's the largest employer. So while it's all understandable to not inundate the healthcare system, and everybody can understand that, and that was the purpose of the 2 weeks to slow the spread, 2 weeks to crush the curve. We're now 18 months into the 2 weeks. We will be hitting our 2-year anniversary of the 2 weeks to slow the spread. But Ontario has decided that they'll create a vaccine passport. England tried it. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of England, and his ministers said no, it's not going to happen. It's not a good idea. But Canada is pressing on. Justin Trudeau will be pressing on with a federal guideline for all provinces to follow, so all the provinces can be on board with the same isolation of the non-vaccinated people. Now, the principle and the idea behind it is fine. Who's going to say no? This is a bad idea to protect people, because after all, the passport is there to help people and to protect people and protect the vulnerable, and to protect people that have had the vaccine. Well, in our last episode, we did talk about a vaccine and what a vaccine is. But we know that definition doesn't hold up. So if you are vaccinated, you should be prevented from getting said disease or said illness. But we know that that's not the case. So the vaccinated are protected, or in this case, not protected, against people. Now, we know that people that do have the vaccine and are a double dose can carry and pass on COVID. So we know that. That's documented. So really protecting the unvaccinated people at this point. It's keeping them safe, keeping them locked out. Now, what's interesting in Ontario, there's a few things that are covered, what you can't do. You can't go to a gym. You can't go to a movie theater. You can't go to a nightclub. You can't go to a strip club. You cannot go to a restaurant. But what you can do is you can still go and buy alcohol. Because, you see, in Ontario, alcohol is sold by the government. You can still go to the government and get your alcohol, but you can't go to a private business to get your alcohol. Yet again, the government controlling that monopoly. And this is where we've made the argument before that Canada is the land of the monopoly. And you can only look for a few examples is looking at alcohol sales, looking at the telecom and communications, how there's only a handful of companies. And when T-Mobile wanted to branch into Canada's operation, Rogers and Bell screamed foul, and that was shut down by the Canadian Radio and Television Commission, the governing body of telecommunications, and shut them out. See, Canada does not like competition. There is no competition in Canada, and to suggest that there is competition is to question the natural law of Canada, which is the monopoly. And this is why we still have Bombardier still in business. This is why we still have CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which we've covered in past episodes, and their media bailout, why they're getting $1 billion in bailout money, and yet less than 30% of Canadians actually watch in, and even less than 3% of the population tune in to the news programming. It's a failed business, but yet Canada and the Canadian government wants to continue to throw money into this. So getting back to the vaccine passports, it's okay for the government to have business open, but it's not okay for small private businesses to open. So Dr. Kieran Moore, who recently took over Ontario's top doctor, was recently in the news and talking about the vaccine passports. And when posed with the question of how long this will last, he had an interesting response. Please take it away, Dr. Moore.
We'll have to follow the data. That'll be a data-driven decision. We know that this virus wants to spread more aggressively in the cold months as we go indoors, as the humidity levels go down. And so we'll be watching the data and the risk. As soon as we have a high enough immunization rate and the risk is down, we want to remove most public health measures sequentially over time. And so we do have an end game for the pandemic. We're dealing with Delta right now. We hope there's no new variants. And we have a plan to stop public health measures over time by monitoring hospitalizations, number of people in our intensive care units, the amount of people that have taken up the immunization. And really across Ontario, we're doing brilliantly. At 85.2% of our eligible population has taken up first doses, and we'd love for them to finish their second doses and more people to come forward. Immunization and prevention is our means of getting out of this pandemic.
Now, what I thought was most interesting in that was this statement here, Dr. Moore.
And so we'll be watching the data and the risk. As soon as we have a high enough immunization rate and the risk is down, we want to remove most public health measures sequentially.
They want to remove most, not all, most. So if you listen to it, he's saying he wants to remove most, but not all. Now, when we started the show, it's week 38 of the year. And then we can go and we can take a look at historical flu numbers. And we know we'll start seeing an increase in the next 2 to 3 weeks. You're going to start seeing historical data shows, and you can take a look again at canada.ca /EN/Public Health Services Publication Disease Flu Watch. And I'm looking here at the year of 2016 and 2017, and we can see it's right at week 43 it starts to become that uptake of positive influenza tests. So we'll start seeing those rises. We'll start seeing at 43, and we'll start seeing a decrease. Really, the big drop-off is usually around week 9. But those numbers are very, very high. There's going to be thousands of cases of positive tests. So you really start seeing the same amount of tests today in week 21. So when these bureaucrats, remember, Dr. Kieran Moore is not an elected official. Dr. Kieran Moore is appointed. And he'll have that job for as long as he wants to have that job. Or he's grossly incompetent and maybe someone decides to fire him, but usually not the case with bureaucrats. But he's not an elected official. Now, so when Dr. Moore is talking about removing some gradually, Are we going to see a gradual increase or decrease of these measures around week 1? Absolutely not. Usually flu seasons are at their peak in January. Are we going to see that decrease in February? Likely not. Again, it's a cold month and you're going to see those numbers that are high. Historical numbers are all going to show the exact same patterns. So you probably will see a decrease perhaps in April, an estimate of April. But will you see more and more restrictions? That I'm quite sure that you will see more and more restrictions as these numbers continue to grow, and they will grow because these diseases are passed around. And it will get around because we know that people that are vaccinated can still spread and get. And the reason why I bring this up is because we're going to take a look at a Newsweek article that was published September 22nd, today. And the headline is, dangerously mutated COVID variant detected in 47 U.S. states. We're not talking about the Delta variant. This is not the Delta variant that Dr. Kieran Moore stated. And here's the article from Newsweek. A new COVID variant that infected vaccinated residents, and again, vaccinated residents and staff at a Kentucky nursing home has been detected in 47 U.S. states, according to data. The R1 variant spread through 45 residents and staff at the nursing home after an unvaccinated staff member triggered the infections in March, the Kentucky Department of Public Health revealed. Due to its mutation, the variant, first detected in Japan, was able to bypass the antibody protection present in the fully vaccinated. According to Outbreak.info, a website that collects data on COVID variants, as of September 21st, R1 has now infected more than 10,567 people around the world and has been detected in 47 states. Maryland was found to have the highest number of cases, with 399 cases being detected since it was first found in the country. In total, 2,259 Americans have been found with the R1 strain, which was first detected in the country on March 15, 2020. The latest case to be detected in the U.S. was on August 6 and was found in 0.5% of cases. Outbreak.info also reported the strain has been found in at least 31 countries worldwide, including China, India, and many nations in Western Europe. Despite the low number of infections, former Harvard Medical School professor William A. Hastine said the new mutations found in the R1 variant could help it spread more easily. Writing in Forbes, he said the 5 variations found in R1 can lead to increased resistance to antibodies. This means it could make the variant better at evading those antibodies that are created by having the vaccine and in those who have already been infected. R1 contains the W152L mutation in a region of the spike protein that is the target of antibodies that could reduce their effectiveness, according to the CDC. The W152L mutation was also present in a minor variant of the Delta strain that was detected in India. R1 also shares mutation with other variants, namely C241U, NSP12, P323L, and D614G. D614G causes increased infections, while it is not known what effect the other two have. All 3 mutations have been detected in strains that supersede the original Wuhan strain. Data from Johns Hopkins University found that as of Tuesday, COVID-19 pandemic has killed more than 4.55 million people and had infected some 229 million. The World Health Organization continues to monitor COVID-19 strains and classifies them based on their rate of infections. Eta, Lola, and Kappa were recently downgraded from being variants of concern to variants under monitoring after the circulation was hindered by other variants. So what we're looking at here is another variant, and this is not the Delta variant. We could call this perhaps the Japan or the Japanese variant. So we know that people are infected and have been vaccinated and are vaccinated. So if we know, and the data is suggesting, and we know that all the politicians listen to the data, that's all that they talk about is we follow the science, follow the science. Well, if the science is saying this vaccine is not going to protect people from the new mutations or any further mutations or any other form, then why are restrictions being put in place on passports? Why are politicians mandating and making rules to say, if you don't have this out-of-date vaccine, then you can't come in? So how do we know that Canada will continue to carry on? Well, what's interesting about Canada is you can always look towards America as a prediction of how Canadian politics will usually act. And when it comes down to major world events, Canada usually follows suit with America. So what did President Joe Biden have to say about the Pfizer vaccine? So here's what President Joey Hands Biden had to say.
Shipped nearly 160 million doses to 100 countries, more than every other country has donated combined. America's donations of 500 million Pfizer vaccines through COVAX that I've announced before the G7 summit in June have already begun to ship. Today, I'm announcing another historic commitment. The United States is buying another 500 million doses of Pfizer to donate to low and middle income countries around the world. This is another 500 million doses that will all be shipped by this time next year. And it brings our total commitment of donated vaccines to over 1.1 billion vaccines to be donated.
We briefly touched upon Pfizer on prior episodes. Again, droidscanada.com for all our past episodes you can take a look at. And we did talk about how much money that Pfizer did spend, $16 million, on lobbying the U.S. federal government, but how much money that they made last year on COVID vaccine from the federal government. So how much are they going to make? Well, that's an awful lot of money that they'll be making in the next year as the rest of the world gets shipped out all these vaccines. It's all, at this point, all about the money. Because we know that the vaccines are not protecting the new strains, the new variants, the new flu. The flu changes from year to year. You can go back and see the information. You can go back and see what flu strand, influenza A, B, C, SARS. We can see what strand was more dominant over past years. Much like we can see now that there's new strains that are more dominant each year. But so long as taxpayers are giving money for the vaccine, for an old vaccine that's ineffective, governments and policymakers will continue to follow the science only when it suits them. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great week. You've been listening to The Fact Is, and I'm your host, Hollis Grant.
Dan, what happens every Thursday?
That would be DCR Droids Canada Radio.
And what time is it at on Thursday?
That's from 9 till 11 p.m.
Dumb question, where do you find it?
You find that at accessradio.ca.
And what's the best part?
It's free.